Okay, guys. So let's talk a little bit about what is one of the hardest, if not the hardest things about building a combat robot for the first time, especially. Um, this is something a lot of builders run into and have issues with, especially if they're not, you know, familiar with having to design anything. Obviously, if you're, an engineer and you're constantly having to come up with ideas and design them and build them in CAD and put them into practice, you probably won't run into this issue as much, but maybe even still, you'll run into this problem. I know this was a huge one for me. This went on for years, even before I knew that there were competitions in my area. I wanted to build one of these things, and I had my ideas, but just getting from that idea phase into starting to design, not even build, just starting to design it, like actually have a concrete design ready, even before CAD or any of that stuff. It was difficult for me. And I'm going to kind of explain what you could do that will get you out of this slump. Um, and the very first thing I want to say is you got to come up with your idea. You have to, obviously you want to build one of these things. You've seen BattleBots, you've seen NHRL. You know the what the meta is. What the counter to some of those metas are, and maybe there's some other fun little designs that you want to try, or you have your very own novel idea that you want to put into practice. That's great. That's a big step. What I suggest to you after you come up with your idea, let's for sake of the conversation say you want to build a 3 pound vertical spinner. In your head you want it to have a big single tooth disc, right? Let's say you want that disc to be 5 inches, but you also want to have a lifting mechanism and a self-righting mechanism on this bot, right? Um, what I suggest doing is going to some of the websites that you buy components. You have to start to get the feel for what components you need. I'm not going to really get into that in this video. I will tell you that there are a lot of websites that cater to combat robotics and have very specific uh, parts for you to buy. So like if you want a gear motor, there's websites like Just Cause Robotics, BaneBots, FingerTech that have these gear motors that are the motor and gearbox that you know you're going to need. And on the website, you'll find the weight, the size of this gear motor. Maybe it's a weapon motor, the size and the weight of the weapon motor. And you could take that, and the best thing you could do with these components, it doesn't have to necessarily be that component. It could be a wheel, it could be a wheel hub, a weapon shaft, a bearing, anything that you can get a measurement on that you think that you're going to want to incorporate into your robot. There's plenty of good videos from people like Just Cause Robotics or Team Panic, Robert Cowan, that talk about these components, and endless videos on talking about where you can get these things, what components are good. Do your research. One of the best resources you can find is the Combat Robotics page on Facebook, where you could ask builders that have been through this and they know what's going to work and what's the best value for your money, and they could steer you into the right direction. At least get you onto a website that will let you look at what you want, and you can make a decision from there. And the other good resource is going to be the NHRL Discord. Anybody could join this. There's channels on there for design and general questions, first-time bot builders. and this is really the gold standard organization as far as smaller weight class robots, assuming that people are going to be building a 30-pound and under robot for the first robot. This is a great resource for you. Okay, so we talked about where you could find these components. Again, I'm not going to get into how all these components go together, but once you have an idea of how the electronics are going to work, what you want to put into this, the next step, and this is a very important one, is to just take a pen and a piece of paper big enough to draw out a one-to-one version of these components in your robot, preferably graph paper, because that makes the measuring easier. And you're going to take your gear motor, your weapon motor, the size of the motor, the size of the weapon that you want, and you're going to just literally, with a pen and paper, sketch this out. And you're going to get an idea of how big these components are. Let's say your gear motor is a 1/4 inch by 2 inches long. It's actually probably pretty close to where you'd be for a Beetle weight gear motor. You could draw that out, see about how far apart you'd want them from each other. You can then take your whatever ESCs you've decided on, the size, you have the weight of these on a separate box in the side. You could just put the weight of all these components, so you could add these up as you go. And you just draw out the general shape of the robot that you want and see how these components can fit into it. Do you wind up with a ton of extra space in there? A lot of extra space can be expensive because you have to armor all that space, and the cross section of the robot just generally being bigger for no reason at all. Maybe it has to be that big to get your design into practice. Maybe you want it to be a really, really wide robot and you need it to be that big. But in a lot of cases, people design their robots for the first time way too big. And it's good to have a little bit of extra wiggle room in the size, so you have in the size of the robot, so you have room to make changes, just a little 10% extra space. Don't make it these huge sloths of space on the inside of your robot, because again, that's wasted weight because you have to make the frame bigger to accommodate that space. Get the general shape down, get your components in there, see how they all fit together, draw from a top-down view, and then from a side view of your robot. Draw, if you want a 5-inch spinning weapon, sure, draw out a 5-inch weapon with the thickness that you think that you'd want. It's hard to decide get an idea without CADing the weight of these things that you're going to run into. So one of the best things you could do is like go on to sites like Just Cause Robotics or FingerTech and look at some of the pre-made weapons they have. Maybe you could buy one of those weapons. Maybe it fits into the characteristics that you need. But really, you could just kind of look at something that's similar sized and see about how much that weighs and just get an idea, and maybe just give or take weight section in the side. So you're getting an idea now of the weight of everything and the spatial constraints of the minimum amount of space that you need to fit these components, and leave enough room for the weapon to spin, leave enough room if you're using a outrunner motor for clearance for the weapon. You're gonna start to get an idea. So this way you could save yourself a lot of work when you start to CAD, or if you're just going to fabricate. You could fabricate a robot by hand by drawing templates and then cutting that template out in UHMW or metal. The first Smack-O-Lantern, there was zero CAD. Well, I don't want to say zero CAD. Later on, right before I put the robot out for the first fight, I did start to learn how to use Tinkercad, and I 3D printed some forks and some little standoffs to keep it from stopping on one side. But you could really build a robot without any CAD. You could, just from this drawing phase, come out with a very, very close estimate on what you would need, leave a little extra space, maybe 10, 15%, no more than that, extra space to, I didn't account for this, I have to just move this over a little bit. And you have that extra space without having to go through a complete redesign. And a little bit of extra space is good, because if somebody comes down on you with a weapon or hits you in that area, you're going to have a little bit extra space there. And air is a pretty good form of armor. But again, you don't want too much. But you'll start to get this idea. You'll start to get out of this idea phase where you're just thinking in your head and you can't escape this circle of thoughts, because it's easy to think of something, but it's hard to compartmentalize and put things aside and see really how everything is going to fit together. Because you might get it together and you might say, this idea is not going to work in this weight class with these drive components, this size battery. And you could see where you start to go from there. I think it is a very good tool to have a 3D printer, almost mandatory these days. To have a 3D printer and start learning how to use that, learning how to print first, setting up your printer, going and learning the simplest form of CAD, which would be Tinkercad. And later on you could start to learn Fusion 360, but Tinkercad is a great tool. It's just like literally a website-based CAD designer, which you basically just drag and drop and stretch different shapes, and you could really, if you get good at it, do a lot. But later on, as you move into your second, third robot, you're going to start to realize the limitations of something like Tinkercad, and you're going to want to start to learn something like Fusion 360 or some other form of design. But again, for your first bot, not necessary. You can completely cut and build these things, and this will really help push you past that rut that you get stuck in your head. And the next step is to start, getting this into practice. Are you going to CAD this stuff out? Are you going to start to prototype on your 3D printer? Are you going to start to just print parts and see what happens? We'll go over that in another video, but I think that this is really a good first step. And I'm going to link some of those resources for you down in the description. I'll link Tinkercad. I'll link some of the websites where you could look at some of these components. And yeah, I think that about does it for this video. Good luck. Happy building. Take care, guys. Like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. We could take it to the next step, which would be like the actual design of the robot. But yeah, take care, guys.